Hello, everybody, and welcome to another year of Hannon Hill's webinar series. This is 2024 webinar series for Hannon Hill. We'll have about 8 this year, and I just want to thank you, everybody, for being here on this Monday with us. So today we're talking about maximizing enrollment, leveraging website personalization to attract mission fits students. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming our guest, Bart Kaler with Kaler Solutions. This webinar is brought to you by Hannon Hill. So the webinar outline goes like this. We'll do a brief introduction of the webinar speakers. Then we'll go through 4 parts. It's the enrollment cliff. We'll talk about that a little bit. Then we talk about how to identify mission fit students. Then we talk about how to market to non-traditional students and to mission fit students through a shoestring budget, because we know not everybody has the same amount of money to share and to spend on marketing. And then we'll talk about how to develop and create an enrollment-driven website along with personalization. And then at the end, we'll go through the Q&A with everybody. So quick introduction. Bart Kaler, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, I'm Bart Kaler. I'm the founder of Kaler Solutions, co-host of the Higher Ed Marketer podcast, and just a brand new author with my book, Chasing Mission Fit, which a lot of this webinar is based on.
Very good. And I'm Chris Raposo. I run the marketing department at Hannon Hill. I bring those webinars to you. I also organize the Cascade User Conference. If you're a client of Hannon Hill, we thank you so much for being at the Cascade User Conference, and I hope you will join us throughout this webinar series this year. And besides doing my work as a marketer at Hannon Hill, I also have a podcast, The Education Marketing Leader. So since we're going to talk about the enrollment cliff here in a bit, we just want to gauge and see where everybody stands with the enrollment cliff, what your knowledge on it is, so we know how much time we should spend on the enrollment cliff. So here's a quick poll for you. Please let us know which part of the country is most affected by the enrollment cliff. What do you all think? All right, very good. All right, let's share those results. Okay, looks like we got almost half of the audience thinks Northeast and Midwest is what the part is going to be most hit by the enrollment cliff. Some 34% think it's the South and 14% think it's the West. So it is actually the Northeast and the Midwest that's going to be primarily hit by the enrollment cliff, but everybody's going to see the effects of it. So I just want to see where we all stand. So this is a good way to see it. So the enrollment cliff, just as a brief introduction of it to build a base on what we're going to talk about here. It means it's the decline of traditional age student that's referred as the enrollment cliff, and it's largely because of the economic downfall during the Great Depression in 2008. So people during that time put off the having children or didn't have children at all, or just put a hold on it for a while, and we see the effects of that 17 years later now, coming into 2025, 2026. And the Western Interstate Commission of Higher Education, also called WICHE, were one of the first ones who identified that enrollment cliff. So WICHE is a research company that projects high school students coming out of high school year over year, and their publication, Knocking on the College Door, talks about which areas and which geographic locations are going to be most hit. So if you can see top right, Northeast, Midwest are going to mostly affected, especially in Illinois. It's going to be a drop of about 24% there. And I recently had a webinar with Dr. Carrie Phillips where we talked about the enrollment cliff and how to navigate it last October. And she pulled out some numbers to see, if you just look at the geographic breakdown there in the Northeast, there's supposedly a 75,000 traditional age student decline. Midwest is going to be about 100,000. West is going to be 125, and the South about 100,000. But besides the geographic shift, there's also going to be a demographic decline. So the white traditional age students are going to decline by about 350,000. Black students are going to be about 50,000. But then there's also an increase of the student demographic. Asian population students go up to about 50,000, and then Hispanic college students increase by 100,000. Now, we've seen the demographic enrollment cliff coming for a while. WICHE stated that, they shared that. We were able to prepare for it somewhat, but what we didn't prepare for, couldn't see coming, was the COVID-19 COVID-19 pandemic. And through research, which I found out through Bart Kaler's book, Chasing Mission Fit, he did a little bit of digging in there, and he saw that there was a decline in high school student enrollment, public high school student enrollment of about 700,000 students. Some of these students, they moved to private schools. It was about 103,000, 184,000 registered for homeschooling. 138,000 of those moved out of state. So the states that were tallied were DC and 21 other states. But there were 230,000 students, high school students, during the COVID-19 pandemic. They didn't enroll in private school, they didn't enroll in homeschooling, and they didn't move out of state. So there are 230,000 traditional age students that were supposed to come out of high school that are missing. And we've seen some of the effects here since 2016. There were 70 institutions that already closed. 48 of them closed, 22 of them merged, and 43% of them were faith-based institutions. The majority of them were out of Massachusetts. So it's the smaller schools that have an endowment of $1 million or less that are most affected by it. Now, if you remember the Ricci map there, you could see the Northeast and the Midwest are primarily affected, but then states like Florida, Alabama, and Texas, the southern state, there's actually an increase in traditional age students. So there is fertile ground if you're in the Northeast and in the Midwest, or even in the West. You probably want to engage people from the South to come to your institution. Also, traditionally underserved demographics, maybe you primarily target one demographic or they just so come to your school. Maybe you'll have to diversify that portfolio and start engaging some other demographics like the Asian demographic or the Hispanic demographic, or totally look outside the traditional age student population like adult learners or non-traditional students. For example, there are over 40 million adults that have some college and no degree. So there's an opportunity there as well. But just because they're there doesn't mean they come to your institution. So you have to figure out how can you find those people, those students that align with the mission of your institution and the vision. So you not only get them into the doors, but keep them there through retention. And Bart's going to talk a little bit about how to identify those mission fit students.
Thanks, Chris. Let's go back to that slide, because before I go into identifying, I want to kind of give everybody just a take on this for a second, because this is one of the things that part of the premise of my book was that I believe that there are students out there somewhere who are a perfect mission fit for your institution. And I'm also going to say that I think there are students within each of these buckets that are a perfect mission fit for your institution. So it doesn't matter if your institution's a large flagship, if it's a tiny micro college. I really believe that there are people out there, depending on what your enrollment goals are, there's enough people out there that can fit and that want to find your institution. They just haven't discovered it yet. And so if you look at it, if you're in the Northeast, there's a small percentage of people in Florida, Alabama, and Texas who want exactly what you have. You just have to be able to figure out how to get in front of them so they can discover that. There's plenty of Asian, Hispanic, other diversity types of students who want what you have. You just have to figure out how to get in front of them. And with the 1 in 4 adults who have some college but no degree, they often will want to see exactly what you have. So let's talk a little bit about, how do you identify those mission fit students then? So you really kind of have to know who are they. And so, I just gave you an idea that they might not necessarily fit a demographic profile, but there's a pretty good chance that they're going to fit a profile that's very similar to yours. So that next step then is, how do they, align with your mission and values? So before you figure out who your mission fit students are, you have to know who you are as an institution. A lot of you have already done branding exercises. You may have even already done some persona exercises to help identify who your mission fit student is. But I think it's important for you to take a really hard look at what the mission is of your school, what the values of your school are, and what are those unique benefits that you do. What's that unique selling proposition? If you go back into Marketing 101, that USP, really being able to define that well and understanding who you are is going to help you then figure out, okay, this is what we have. What is it? Who are those people that want exactly what we have, and how can we match that up? And so that's really how you kind of identify those mission fit students. And then that third thing that you need to look at is what's attracted them to our institution. So not only are you trying to figure out who are those out in the world that we need to engage with. But more than likely, the students who are graduating this year are good examples of your mission fit students because they came, they spent their entire 4 years with you, they retained, and they're graduating. So sometimes it's really important for you just to kind of take some stock in what you have and who you have on campus and really be able to articulate well with their help. Why is it that you chose our institution? Why did you end up here? Sometimes you can do at the very beginning what's called admitted student research. So you kind of ask the students when they first arrive, or maybe ask the students who did not come but went to another school, why did you end up coming here? Ask them then. And then on the way out the door, you ask them, you know, where are you now? What are you doing now? And why did you choose us to begin with? And so asking your graduates, asking your alumni, asking current students, asking yourselves who you are as an institution, you're going to help define who you are, what that mission is that you have, whether you're an engineering focused school in STEM, whether you are liberal arts focused, whether you are a faith-based. There's a whole lot of different flavors of that. And even beyond that, you can go really deep into even more levels of that. And so that's one of the reasons why you've really got to start with a really strong brand and a real strong exercise of understanding who you are before you can identify those mission fit students. Because part of the problem is that, you know, going to this next slide, if we go into the idea of this general awareness, I think a lot of times, you know, we just think that, well, if more people knew about us, that would solve the problems. If I had a dime for every time a board member or a president came to me and said, Bart, you know, our school is just the best kept secret in the world, I could retire now and not have to do any more work because everybody will claim that their school is the best kept secret. But the problem is that you need to do more than just general awareness. I mean, you've got to really make sure that, you know, your benefits are being heard, that they're being understood, and they're being valued by your mission fit audience. It's a problem sometimes when we just think that everybody needs to know about us. And so you've got to really be able to understand, you know, who are those mission fit students, but then how are they going to hear about you? So if your mission fit students are traditional undergrad, kind of the Gen Alphas and the Gen Zs, you've got to understand everything about them and how they tick. Generation Alpha are the sophomores in high school right now. And they have spent a large percentage of their lifetime behind a mask or doing school through Zoom. So you've got to recognize that they're going to bring to the table when they choose a college expectations that Gen Z didn't have, that millennials didn't have, that Xers like myself did not have. They're going to be a different expectation set. And so you've got to make sure that you are speaking to them the way that Generation Alpha wants to be spoken to. We're very familiar with Gen Z and some of the ways that they like to be spoken to, how they don't like to talk on the phone, but they use their phones. There's a lot of quirks that you might look at, especially if you're not Generation Z. As a boomer, I might call them quirks. As Generation Z, it's just normal. And so you've got to understand those different aspects of who they are, what they're about, and you've got to know them. And so a big part of the book that I spend some time in is just unpacking what these generations are like, what their traits are like, so that you can better understand, so that as you start to figure out who your mission fit student is, how do you want to talk to them? Now let's go ahead and go to the next point. And one of the main thesis that I have is that the best way to talk to your mission fit students, once you've identified who they are, is to figure out what are their watering holes. So where does your ideal student spend time? And again, this goes back to why it's so important to even talk to current students or talk to, you know, graduating students or alumni, young alumni. Where are they spending time? And, you know, sometimes if we look at that, there's a lot of different options. It could be digital. You could be looking at social media. They could be, you know, if they're younger Gen Z and Alpha, there's probably a good chance they're on TikTok or Instagram Reels. They might be on Reddit. If they're gamers, they might be on Discord. There's a whole lot of different places that these students might be. So there's not only the digital, but there's also the physical. So, you know, there's places online where you're going to find them, but there's also those physical places. They might be going to after school clubs. They might be having high school or travel teams, especially if they're interested in athletics. There might be community centers. There might be churches if they're faith-based, or synagogues. Or other places. There's a whole lot of different places. And so once you understand who that persona is, or that mission fit student, then you can start diving down into where do they spend their time on digital and where do they spend their time in physical life. You know, back in the 80s, I'm going to date myself here. I'm going to sound like grandpa, but back in the 80s, you know, if you wanted to find prospective students, you'd go to the mall. Everybody went to the mall. That's where they hung out. Well, the malls have gone away. They're not, that's not where you will find a watering hole for prospective students now. And I call it watering holes because it's a little bit like if you go out into the wild and let's say you want to do nature photography. You don't just walk around in the woods absent-mindedly. You go out and you figure out where are the watering holes that you know the animals are going to come to get water because they're going to have their needs met. Prospective students are the same thing. They're going to have their needs met, whether it's social, whether it's, physical, whatever it's going to be, their needs are going to get met in these watering holes, and that's where they're going to gather with other people like them. And so if you can spend some time and do some research to figure out where those watering holes are, you'll be much better, more likely to be able to identify those mission fit students and be able to engage with them in those places.
Yeah, I have a good story here about some of these mission fit students and where they're engaged, where they hang out socially. So I used to go to this church in South Tampa. South Tampa has a lot of young people, a lot of hip people. And this church had a pastor. He was about 30 years old, right? And he brought this message that was so engaging to Gen Z, or so welcoming, that they flocked to this church. So within 6 years, they opened 6 different campuses. Now, Southeastern University is out of Lakeland. Lakeland is about an hour away from Tampa, Florida. So they saw an opportunity. They saw a watering hole there, and they started opening up or offering classes on that church campus while the students that, or the congregation, those young Gen Zers, those high schoolers that were about to go into the college age, may not have driven to Lakeland, Florida to attend Southeastern University. But Southeastern saw an opportunity and they went to them, found them there, found the watering holes, and that way they increased their enrollment without them ever having to go to Lakeland. So that was a good way to find that watering hole there, and then just tap into that when you find it. Could be a barbershop too, could be a mall, like Bart said, at least that was how it was in the 80s.
And I think one other thing too is, like, let's think about if you're an engineering school. Project Lead the Way is a K-12 focused organization that focuses on STEM education. They sponsor a lot of robotics clubs, a lot of other things. Being able to figure that out and being able to pay attention to where those robotics clubs are, especially if you have an engineering major, finding those students that are spending their weekends doing those clubs that are STEM focused, that would be another example of a watering hole. So good story, Chris.
Absolutely. Let's see where your watering holes are through a poll question.
So we've got the poll came up. What watering holes do your students find themselves in? So churches, community centers, social media, corporations, high schools. So just drop those in, and okay, looks like a lot of people are saying social media, which I would have guessed that most of you could say social media. High schools certainly is going to be another big part because of traditional students. A lot of you might be faith-based or community center-based. I could see that. And then corporations, those are probably more for your non-traditional programs where, hey, I've got some students who might fit into that 1 in 4 adults who have some college but not a degree. Corporations or companies would be a good place to find them, certainly. So great results. Thanks for sharing that, folks. So let's move on to going a little bit beyond just the traditional students. And so, we've talked and hinted about the idea that, 1 in 4 adults have some college, but not a degree. And so, 75% of the prospective students in the United States are what you would consider non-traditional students. Those would be students who don't fit that 17, 18-year-old high school student graduating, moving on to a traditional college experience. And so there's a lot of opportunity here, especially as we start looking at this enrollment cliff. Not only is it different demographics and other things, but this idea of moving beyond focusing on traditional could be a great opportunity. And as we look at these different things, you've got not only your non-traditional students, but also dual enrollment students. There's, according to Inside Higher Ed, 1.5 million students in the United States are wanting to do dual enrollment. Those are the students that are taking college level courses in high school. And I know my kids, they're Generation Z. I've got a couple in college right now, one in high school. They have all done dual enrollment to be able to get a leg up. I mean, honestly, some of it is, academic, but some of them is, my son, he wanted to take all the courses that he could so that he could bring his car on campus earlier. So at Purdue University, you had to be a sophomore to have your college on campus. Well, he did the math and figured out if he took enough dual enrollment courses, he could qualify as a sophomore by, Christmas, and so he could have his car on second semester. So there's a whole lot of different reasons why students are doing dual enrollment. And again, figuring out your mission fit students will help you figure out how you want to market that particular program. Another thing is the idea of graduate students. And so 3.1 million in the United States of students who are looking to take graduate courses or to earn a post-secondary degree in graduate studies. And so those are a couple of the other areas as we look at the enrollment cliff. How can we beef up our enrollment when one side's drying up? We need to look at those other areas that might give us great opportunities. So let's talk a little bit about who is influencing your mission fit students. So when we talk about prospective students and those mission fit students, we have to realize that behind every mission fit student, prospective student, is a mission fit influencer. And so these influencers, we have to keep in mind that according to different generations, they're going to be different people. So Generation Z, if you look at a lot of the studies, social media comes in number 2 right behind mom. So mom is always like the number 1 influencer for traditional undergrad students. And then social media influencers often come in number 2, even before you might have teachers or counselors or friends. A lot of times social media is where that is. And it's not so much that it's social media from the schools, but it's people talking about the schools on social media. That could be a lot of different places. It could be on Instagram. It could even be on a place like Zemi, where the entire social media network is only made up to simply gather around to talk about where am I going to go to college. And if you look at the social media, if you go to the Apple or the different stores for the apps, Zemi ranks usually about 16 to 20 after TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, all those other ones. Zemi comes in the top 20. So there's a lot of students that may be talking about your school on social media in a place that you might not be aware of. And so I would definitely say check out Zemi. Another area here is of influencers for your social media might be online reviews. So the idea of being able to, what other people are saying about it. So it gets back to that peer-to-peer. That's one of the things that really drives Generation Z is what are my friends and my peers saying about these institutions? So that's why social media and social media influencers are important, but also that's why online reviews are important. So if if you're not paying attention to your Google reviews or your Yelp reviews, be sure to take a look at that. There's a whole lot of different places where they might be talking about your school, Facebook, Instagram, all kinds of places where they can leave a review or read other reviews. So those would be a couple of definitely places where influencers are putting their mark.
Yeah, and I watched, I attended the NCMPR National Conference last week where I went onto a influencer presentation, and the lady, the marketing manager from Hagerstown Community College, she presented on how they utilize current students to take over their social media, just build awareness, build trust with other students, and build familiarity. And the way they do this, they give them a stipend, like about $500 or so in scholarship money for a semester. So, and those are usually student athletes, people that are more better known in the community, but also people that already have a social media following. So that's one way to go about it, and employ sort of your current students to get them involved and talk to their peers on the
That's great.
platform.
That's a good point, Chris. Another of the influencers, as I mentioned earlier, it might be for Generation Boomers and for Xers, just to kind of give you an idea of other types of generations. They're not as influenced by social media or even by, the idea of reviews. They're more influenced by word of mouth. So what somebody says, what a friend might say, especially in their physical watering holes or on social media, but usually on social media, it's going to be friends or colleagues or other people that they know as opposed to an influencer that they're following. And then especially for boomers, the idea of traditional media, some of them still read newspapers, some of them still watch television news, some of them still engage in the broadcast media. And so traditional media is sometimes, especially if you're focused on that demographic, a good place to look at that as well. And then also just embracing the different kinds of ethnicities. I mean, as Chris mentioned earlier in his area of where those areas are growing, We're expecting, about 50,000 more Asian Americans in the pipeline as far as prospective traditional undergrad students. It goes up much larger for Hispanic traditional undergrad students. And I would look at Hispanics. These are probably going to be first generation Hispanics. And so you have to realize that too, when you start looking at these different ethnicities and these different new opportunities that you have, you can't just throw it into the same ComFlow and everything else that you've always done. Especially with Hispanic families, there's a familiar aspect to their culture that the prospective student does not necessarily make the decision on their own when it comes to choosing a college. Many times it's a family decision that mom or dad or grandma and grandpa might be making. And so it's really important that as you put your recruiting materials together and your marketing, enrollment marketing together, that you're very cognizant of that as you are starting to reach out to these other aspects of these ethnicities. And so with a Hispanic family, we're currently working with a couple schools right now to not only do the translation for some materials, but also try to figure out strategies to also do the cultural translation. And so I've got some folks on my team who are actually first generation Hispanic students themselves that are pursuing their doctorate and other advanced degrees. And so they're helping us with some writing and some translating of that cultural. But also I would say that there's a lot of other additional tools that I'll show you one here in a moment when we're done with the slide. But you've got to really understand that not only do you need to maybe recast some of your brochures or some of your web pages or some of your communication for these specific audiences, but you've also got to make sure that you're not just doing lip service. I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, here's a brochure that explains how important your daughter or your son will be on campus as a first generation Hispanic student. But if you're not backing that up with professors and leadership and other people on the campus who are reflecting that, that's not going to go very far. And so you've got to make sure that not only is this a marketing challenge that could be embraced, but it also needs to be a cultural challenge on your institution that I think is important to kind of look at as well. And you also have to make sure that you speak your audience's language, not only directly as we've talked about with translations, but also in those cultural ways and being cognizant and sensitive to what those needs are and being able to tell those. And there's a lot of really good tools coming online with whether it's with AI or whether it's with other aspects that you can lean into generative artificial intelligence. And so here's a couple videos that I'm going to show you real quick. And let me set this up real quick before we show it. But this tool is called Hey Gen. It's a video platform that utilizes generative AI. And what I did is I created a video that just explained, what I knew about German and how I spoke in English. So I did not speak in a foreign language in either one of these videos, but the tool took my video and it translated it into, the first one's German, the second one is Spanish. It matched my tone of voice. It matched my lip syncing so that it actually sounds like it's actually me saying it. And so after we're done watching these, I'll kind of give you some use cases that we're considering.
Dies ist der erste und dies ist ein Beispiel dafür, dass ich die Sprache nicht kenne. Deutsch kann etwas. Deutsch in der Highschool und im College gelernt, aber denke nicht, dass so fließend sein könnte wie jetzt, in der Art und Weise, wie diese KI es übersetzt. Nunca he tomado español en mi vida, pero esta herramienta lo está traduciendo de una manera bastante decente que me impresiona bastante. Me encantaría tu opinión también, para saber si esto es preciso o exagerado. Déjame saber qué piensas.
Okay, on that second one, Spanish, I can't roll an R to save my life, but I have talked with a lot of different people who are native Spanish speakers who have validated that is almost a perfect translation for Spanish. I had one client who almost started crying, and she said, "I actually know what part of the country your dialect is from, Bart, and had I not known you, I would have sworn that you were from Mexico." And so the German isn't quite that good. I know Chris kind of gave me a feedback on that one, being a native German himself. And so it's not quite there yet, but there's about 12 different languages that Hey Gen can do. And so the use case that I'm considering on this is not to fake anyone out, but let's say that you're, somebody in leadership at your school, maybe it's your president, would be able to create a video speaking to first generation parents knowing that they don't speak English and English is not their first language, and you would create this video for them, but you would clarify very much up front to say, isn't it amazing that we live in a world where we can leverage technology to communicate? And I just want to tell you how excited we are to have your son or daughter here on campus. And then you could tell the story of what it will be like to have their son or daughter on your school's campus from that perspective of the president, how important that is to them. And it was so important that we wanted to leverage and utilize some technology to communicate that in the best possible way from me personally. That's a really good use case because it recognizes the fact that we're using language. It recognizes the fact that we're trying to do something special beyond for them, and we're recognizing how this could be a tool. I've run that past some of my folks that are helping me with these translations from a cultural standpoint, and Marco's on my team, and I asked him, I said, Marco, watch this video. What would your mom had thought when you were looking at college campuses if they received a video like this? And he told me, he said she would have thought that was the best thing ever, that they took the time to actually communicate in a way that meant something to her. And so just keep that in mind, that there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different tools to kind of engage with these mission fit influencers. So we're going to kind of switch gears here for a little bit on this part 3, and looking at all of this is amazing, and maybe you've identified your mission fit student and the influencers, and now all of a sudden it's like, that's great, Bart. Now I've got to do that in addition to the regular marketing that I'm doing. My marketing budget only goes so far, and I don't have a Coca-Cola budget. So what are we going to do? And so you're not going to need one. And I'm going to kind of give you some best practices of how to do that. And again, go into a lot more depth in the book if you want to go into details on that. But you've got to remember, as you start thinking about this idea of your budget, that your audience, especially if you focus on your mission fit students, is not the entire city. So let's say, or the region. Your target audience is really going to be those that you narrow down to that mission fit student. And so just going back to the idea of the entire city, it's like, let's say that, you've got 100% of the city, probably only about 50% of the city is even interested in education, or maybe even 30%. So all of a sudden you've collapsed down the amount of people that need to really be aware of your institution and education. Now, when you look at that, depending on who you are as an institution, granted, you might make an argument that, hey, we're a larger flagship. We need to get brand awareness out there. We've got a large whatever. You might argue brand awareness, and I get that, and I will agree with that, and I'll yield that to you. But otherwise, if you have a very small budget and you're like, I have to make a decision on how I'm going to spend my money, you might not need to talk to the 30% who are looking in education. You might be, let's say you're a faith-based school, or maybe that you're a very specialized school that only has a few majors. Well, now all of a sudden, the amount of people who need to hear your message might only be more like 5 to 10% of the entire audience. And so you don't necessarily need to be as wide sometimes as traditional broadcast media and traditional advertising will do. You can narrow your target audience much slower. And the more you narrow it, the less money you're going to need on brand awareness. And sometimes the more money that you can spend on other things that are going to be more focused on how those mission fit students are going to be engaged, how those influencers are going to be engaged, and you're going to be doing it in their watering hole. So they're going to pay more attention to it as opposed to just another piece of noise that's in their daily activity. So one of the first areas that I always look at is looking at content as your cornerstone. So content really is kind of the fuel for your entire marketing engine. I have a philosophy, and I unpack it in the book of, if you look at education and enrollment marketing specifically, it's kind of like a three-legged stool. You've got your website, you've got content that's going to fuel the website, it's going to fuel social media, it's going to fuel, search engine optimization, and then you're going to have lead generation. And those three elements are kind of what makes that three-legged stool that really has enrollment marketing, and you can see success with that. So you've got to have content as your cornerstone to be able to fuel your marketing engine. And then you've really got to focus on the digital based content. And that's really going to be your secret weapon, because digital based content is going to be a whole lot more that you can pour into at a much more cost effective way. And as you look at this content as your cornerstone, there's kind of three things that you're going to need to look at. You're going to need to look at that content that should basically evangelize your institution. Guy Kawasaki was on my podcast recently, and he was the chief evangelist officer at Apple Computer back in the 80s. Steve Jobs hired him to kind of get the word out about personal computers and how revolutionary having a computer on your desktop could be. Well, since then, he has been a chief evangelist at a lot of different places. He's currently chief evangelist at Canva. But he talked about on the podcast that the word evangelist actually means good news, tell the good news. So he told the good news of Apple. He told the good news of Canva. So you need to tell the good news about your school. And so content can help you get that word out and can help tell those stories. It also can help you reach the right people. So again, if you've got content that's specific to a particular watering hole and you've kind of honed that content into that, that's going to get you the right place. You're going to be talking to the right people with the right message at the right time. And that's going to also help you spread that word through word of mouth. So content kind of can do a lot of different things for you in that well. And you can also keep in mind that content being your cornerstone can help you with, leveraging other tools. And so as we go into this next slide, I'm going to show you that, you can look at a lot of different things as far as, how somebody like, something like ChatGPT can help solve a need. Chris, can you forward the slide for me? There you go. Thanks. So you developing that content, tools like ChatGPT or generative artificial intelligence can help you kind of amplify what you might already be doing in content and actually allow you to do a lot more efficiently and a lot more faster and at a higher level of output. And that's going to help you communicate these solutions efficiently. ChatGPT was adopted by millions in just a few weeks. And so it's really as a low marketing spend. I often tell people that I've probably added 20 hours to my work week just by utilizing generative AI. So what I used to be able to do in 60 hours, I can now get done in 40 hours. And so if you think about the cost efficiencies of that, and a lot of people say, well, that's because you're spending $20 a month on ChatGPT Plus. Yes, it is, but $20 a month to add 20 hours of work a week seems pretty efficient to me. And so don't miss out on the opportunities there. And if you want to know more about how to use generative AI in higher education, send me a note or drop a message in chat. We did a summit last October and brought in a lot of experts in higher education who are already leveraging generative AI in their schools and how we're doing that. And so that's a whole nother topic, but that's utilizing tools to help you with content is a really efficient way to go. And one of the things that we did in the book was kind of outline 7 hacks on how you can market on a shoestring budget. And so let's just pull that up. And so the first hack, and again, these are things that you can do to kind of do more things on a limited budget. The first one I talk about is just taking a really good inventory of all your assets. So before you can really save time and save energy and be efficient, you have to know what you have as far as content that you might already have laying around that you can repurpose. So what are there seminars or lectures that have been recorded by different people on campus that maybe there's some content that's buried in those that you could use? Are there old blog posts or articles or research that different people on campus have done that could be turned into a content series or repurposed into new content? Those are some areas that you might want to take some inventory. Do you have student testimonials? How could those student testimonials live beyond just a slot on the website? Could we get the student to record a video of that? Could we turn that into an audio testimonial? There's all kinds of ways to take one piece of content and repurpose it into other ones. I did a blog post where I think I showed that you could really take one piece of content and turn it into about 8 or 9 other ones just by some discipline and some different tools. And then the next hack that we've developed is develop a robust marketing strategy. So as I mentioned earlier, if you haven't already done some personas, that's a really good exercise to do to really figure out and target down who your mission fit students is. While you're doing that, also take the time to say, what kind of messaging would we say if we're talking to only those students that have this profile, that are our mission fit students? We don't need to talk to anybody anymore because we're going to focus in on just our mission fit students and really do that well. What messaging do they want to hear? What's going to help them move the needle, rather than just trying to say something that everybody's going to find okay? Then you want to kind of spend some time conceptualizing these things. Maybe you're developing wireframes if you're doing a website. Maybe you're running focus groups on this. And keep in mind, a lot of times when I say focus groups, a lot of smaller schools say, I thought you were talking about marketing shoestring budgets. I can't afford to, hire a research firm to do focus groups. I'm talking about going into the college cafeteria at lunchtime and just sitting down with some students and say, hey, I've got a couple things I want to run by you. Another thing that we've been playing with is creating some custom GPTs in ChatGPT that are persona based so that we can start asking ChatGPT to act as a sophomore at your school, and how would they react to this, or a high school student, what would they react to this? And so there's a lot of different ways that you can do to start doing those focus groups. The third hack would be kind of creating an enrollment focused website. And Chris, I know you had a story on this one that you were going to share a little bit about the importance of this.
Yeah, last week I talked to a client of ours, New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and the gentleman told me about how their website was structured in the past. It was kind of like a catalog. Their navigation bar was all over the place. There was information there that told students how to get a parking pass for their college campus, right? Something that wasn't really enrollment driven. So what he did is first of all, he took everybody off access. He limited the access to the website. And then he updated the entire user experience on the website and only had an admissions tab, academics tab, and an about tab there. So it's easier for people to navigate that website and drive them down the enrollment funnel more efficiently.
That's great. Another thing, when you do have that website or other places online, I talked earlier about the three-legged stool: website, content, making sure you've got user-focused content. Answering the questions that students are asking is one of the best ways to go about that. Number 5 is looking at, outsourcing to dependable partners. This is something that we had talked about in the book. So whether it's Hannon Hill, whether it's Kaler, whether it's other places, Zemi, there's partners that you need to have in your world that can help you and that are trusted, that are dependable, that can move on as well. Number 6 is kind of realizing that artificial intelligence is your friend. I'd mentioned earlier about the summit that we've done. There's a lot of really good resources if you haven't really gotten into generative AI. Element 451 has several courses that they do. I would look into that. Coursera has a number of really good courses. I know that Vanderbilt has put out some free courses through Coursera. Dr. Jules White, he also shared at our AI summit. He has a couple really good courses on using ChatGPT and how to do prompts and things like that. So definitely look into that. Number 7 hack is one that I like a lot, is recycling business ideas. I used to do some work, early in my career with Motorola, right when they were trying to explain to people what these new phones were, where you could actually take pictures with phones and do these things called text messaging. And we were trying to explain that through these websites. And I learned very quickly that they were trying to, market to the same audience that I was marketing when I was working with schools, which were generation, the high school students. And so I like to often look at business to say, what is it about that idea that I really like that works well, and how can I adopt that for higher ed? And so I've always admired the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile that's been around for decades, and it recently came to our hometown and was parked in the Kroger parking lot, and it just seemed like everybody went over there to check it out because it was just this odd thing that nobody expected. So one of the ideas I had for one of my clients was, why not do the same thing, but just rent an RV and vinyl wrap it and go to high school football games in the fall and throw tailgating parties at these schools that maybe have a lot of prospective students, mission fit students. And so those are a couple different ways of doing that. So we got another poll.
So which of these 7 hacks are you using currently?
Great. Looks like we've got some good results there.
Yeah.
A lot of people are leaning into AI, which is encouraging. Great.
Awesome. Very good. So we're getting to part number 4 of the webinar here as we touch down the plane. So we learned about the demographic enrollment cliff. We learned about how to find the mission fit students, and we learned how to market on a shoestring budget. So now we're going into the digital front door of your institution. Your website these days is like an admissions counselor and enrollments counselor. It's up 24 hours, 7 days a week. And it's your most important asset in 2024. Now you have to remember, with these Generation Alpha, with Generation Z, the attention span is shrinking all the more. So according to research there, you have about 50 milliseconds to make a first impression when somebody comes on your website or when somebody just meets you. And then when it comes to Gen Z, they have about this 8-second filter, where they decide whether they stay on your website or not. That's why it's very important for you to show relevant content right from the get-go. And there are 3 critical questions students ask themselves when they come on your website, along with their parents, perhaps. Will I fit in? Do they have my major? And then, is this institution financially feasible for me? So Bart always gives this great example of going to a furniture store and figuring out how much a piece of furniture costs.
One of my pet peeves is if I go to a school website and I go to your tuition page, and this happens a lot more at the graduate level, but it's the idea that you're going to price it out per cost per credit hour, which I know is a very academic way to do it. It's the way it's listed in the catalog. But the problem is that prospective students don't understand it, nor do they care. It's kind of like if I went to IKEA and said, hey, I need a new table and chairs, and they price it at cost per square foot. It's like, well, I don't want to do the math to figure out how much that table and chairs is going to cost me. I just want to know, what's it going to take me to go home and achieve my goal of having a new table and chairs? So I think it's really important that as we start answering the third question people always ask, is it fiscally feasible for me? How can I afford it? That we make sure that the way that we do that is the most simple, non-friction way possible.
And there's 6 ways to go about creating an enrollment focused website that alleviates the friction. So first of all, we have to remember the website is for the prospective students and not for the board. And as we all know, that especially for private institutions, 93% of the net revenue comes from the students. So we got to make sure it's student tailored and student focused. We want to be clear. We want to serve a need. As Bart mentioned earlier with ChatGPT, they served a need, and within a week, they had 1 million people adopt the product, right? In comparison, Twitter took 2 years, Netflix took 3 years, and you want to make sure you answer the relevant questions these students have. Do I fit in here? Do they have my major? Can I afford it? From the get-go. You want to tell a story there, right? You want to make sure you communicate your unique value proposition and the benefits to the students for going to your institution, because there's so many options now nowadays with online education, with online courses like Bart just mentioned with Coursera. And you want other people to tell your stories, because social proof is the best proof. So if you have student testimonials on your website right from the get-go, that's especially powerful there. And you want to share those on social, on blog posts, through video, and so on. Then you want to make sure you have this. You have a website, a CMS, that helps your website to morph themselves to be available, whether it's on desktop, on tablet, or on a smartphone. These days, the majority of people look at content through a smartphone, especially the younger generation. And you want to make sure it's scannable, for SEO purposes, especially. You want to make sure you have the headline H1, H2, and then easily scannable through bullet points. You want to be concise. You want to be short snippets. They're kind of like, everybody's used to the short form content that you see on social media. Not that you want to have that all on your website as well, that's short, but you want to make sure that you have enough white space for people to be able to scan through it. And you want to be able to apply smart content. If you're a Hand and Hill client, we'll talk about that a little bit later, through Clive, the personalization tool that we offer. And of course, you want to drive traffic, right? You want to identify your audience, your mission fit students. You want to create inbound marketing campaigns through PPC, social, email, and targeting. And then the landing pages that you have, it's very, very, very important to have an actual call to actions. I've heard so many stories from other agency partners where they say they went on and partnered with another institution, and they didn't have a call to action on the landing page, right? So you have to have that. You have to tell people what they need and how to go to the next step in their enrollment process. And you want to make sure you personalize your content. So according to research, the McKinsey company, that did some research on what people like these days when it comes to personalization, and 67% of online visitors, online shoppers, they get frustrated if they don't get an personalized experience. 71 of those expected, actually, when they come to your website. 85% are influenced by personalization, and 98 want that class recommendation. So just think about the user experience when they're on Netflix or on Amazon, right? People get that content that they want tailored to them. So they expect that this is what they're accustomed to. So when they come to a higher ed institutional website, they want that same experience. Now, I have a great story here that Bart's going to share about personalization that goes beyond website personalization, but it's still relevant to this topic.
Yeah, I'm going to do a shortened version of the story just due to time when I want to have enough time to do some questions. But my son applied to 7 different schools. Butler University stood out to him in the sense that they listened to him and figured out who he was. And on the Common App, they asked a couple additional questions that they were allowed to do. And the questions they asked him was, what was the name of his pets? And so he put, Tigger and Stormy, a dog and a cat. Well, after he was accepted, he got a letter from Blue, which is there in the picture, that was addressed to Tigger, our dog, and Stormy, our cat, congratulating the pets for their human being accepted to the school. It was a very clever way of hitting him where he was really was very emotional for him. He got so excited that they took the time to hear him, which is a big Generation Z trait, as well as did something for what he was interested in, which is another one. And so that's just an example. It goes into more detail in the book, and I do also have a couple blog posts about it on my website. But I think that's just something to remember, that you can do little things that can go a long way, because I'm convinced that's why he ended up at Butler over every place else, was because of that personalization.
Yeah, I love that story. That's why I wanted you to share it. But when it comes to website personalization, it's no longer nice to have. It's actually an expectation, as we could see according to the study, the research by McKinsey and Company. So when it comes to website personalization, there are 2 ways to personalize your website. If you're a new client, you have access to Clive, our personalization tool. If you're not a Cascade client, you can still get Clive, the personalization tool, and implement it on your CMS without having to have Cascade CMS. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about how Clive works. So there's 2 ways to gather that information. It's through implicit personalization and explicit personalization. So implicit personalization is the user data is detected without the visitor given some information about themselves. So that's either through geolocation. Let's say you run a campaign, you're in the Northeast, you run a campaign in the Southeast, right? So when these Southeastern or Southwestern prospective students come to your website, you'll immediately can show them tailored smart content that speaks to their values and to their needs. So let's say, for example, if you offer out a state tuition for them, you'll be able to showcase that right away on the website through the smart content. And then there's another way for implicit personalization is through digital body language. That means depending on what pages they visit on your website, the tool, the website identifies what these prospective students like, and then tailors that content again to their needs and shows relevant content. For example, one of our clients, the Wilfrid Laurier University, they delivered smart content through custom pathways on their website. So if somebody went and got some information about housing, for example, when they came back to the website, all of a sudden they got information about, hey, this is what you should look forward to, what to expect when you come to our institution. So they give it to you right away, so you don't have to go searching through multiple tabs to go to where you want to go. And the other way is through explicit visitor attributes. So if somebody fills out a form, tells them about themselves, you'll be able to do that smart content as well. So one thing about the forms is good that, for example, one of our customers, University of Alberta, their Google campus, they utilize forms not only for website personalization, but they also utilize forms to overcome the Great Firewall of China, because they couldn't use the Google Forms in China for their Chinese students. So they sent these forms, Clive forms, to their Chinese students. They were able to fill out their arrival date when they came from China to Alberta, Canada, so a shuttle could wait for them to pick them up from the airport to take them to the university. So that's personalization beyond the website. And then one more way to do explicit personalization is through while the visitors through just a drop down, they identify themselves, whether they're a prospective student or whatever industry they may be interested in. If they're interested in nursing schools, they can identify themselves that way as well. So this is what the University of New Mexico College of Pharmacy did. They did this kind of personalization. They were able to give their prospective students in a market where the applications were going down, through the smart content, they were able to get applications up by 24% and enrollment up by 16%. So we have a customer spotlight on the University of New Mexico there. If you want to read more about that, I can share the link with you as well. So let's do one more poll before we close because we're coming up on time. Are you currently utilizing personalization, whether it's web personalization or other forms of personalization? Okay, great. Let's share that poll. So it looks like a lot of people would like to do the website personalization. So like I said, again, if you're a Hand and Hill customer, talk to us, find out how to implement Clive on your website. It's very easy. The one thing I caution you to do is don't think you have to do a whole campaign on it. Start small with images or smart content and build from there. So key takeaways, you want to make sure you know how to navigate the enrollment cliff, find your ideal mission fit students, and know that you don't need a big budget for it. But you do need a great website because that is your digital front door. So I know we're really coming up on time, but do you have any questions? Are there any questions we can answer? I don't see any questions. We'll do a recap. We're going to send a recording of the webinar after this, probably this afternoon, and with some additional resources. If you're interested in the book, you can download it here. I'm going to send a link to any other way, Bart, people can get the book.
Yeah, you can get it through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, probably order it through your campus bookstore if you'd prefer that way. Really anywhere you get your books. I think I saw it on Walmart.com the other day. So you can do that. We do have a study guide coming out soon. A lot of people are talking about making it required reading for their marketing department or cabinets over the summer. So we've decided to add a study guide with group activities and group questions. And so I really want to use it as a tool. Hope that it's something that you find useful. But thanks so much for the time today. It's been a pleasure talking with you all.
Very good. If you want to have more resources on the demographic enrollment cliff, you can visit our website, the Enrollment Cliff Hub. We have white papers, webinars like this, keynote presentation, and other blog posts. And if you want to learn more about Clive and how to use it, you can scan the QR code here. That'll get you there, and we'd love to help you out with that. Other than that, please connect with Bart and I on LinkedIn. Tune into our podcast, the Hired Marketer Podcast and the Education Marketing Leader Podcast, or find us on LinkedIn if you have any more questions, okay? All right. We thank you so much for being part of today's webinar. Like I said, I'm going to send out a recording to everybody who registered, and then we'll see you at the next one, everybody. Thank you so much. You take care.